So I'm here today with Joe Huey, and we thought it would be really fascinating for you to have more of an in-depth understanding of how, when children are growing up with or have grown up with parents who have a dependency or maybe an addiction to using alcohol to self-medicate themselves, what impact does this have for the children? And most importantly, what can be done, and what do you, if you are the professionals or maybe the carers of children who've been impacted by this, or young people, what do you need to know? So I'm going to let Jo introduce herself, because she knows what she does better than anyone else.
Hi, I'm Jo Huey. Thank you so much. I am a personal change expert, inspirational speaker and author, and I'm also the adult child of an alcoholic. And it's my mission to change perceptions around alcohol misuse and how that impacts on the family. And I educate professionals around what the family experience, specifically what children experience, and also help them to understand a little bit more about alcohol misuse. And that could be social workers, that could be teachers, that could be GPs, that could be anybody that's working with families or has some sort of connection with children that are going to be living in that sort of environment, as well as working one-to-one with individuals themselves, like me, that have grown up with a alcoholic in their life. And so my intention is to start changing perceptions and judgments that happen around alcohol misuse, and also start to raise awareness around the trivialization that happens around alcohol misuse, which is happening far too much these days. Especially
now that is so important. Sorry to jump in, Jo,
yeah,
but I was just thinking, this for me is that really hit a chord then, because you think of most of the popular soaps that everybody watches. Well, I can think of two in particular, Coronation Street and EastEnders. Everyone's down the pub, aren't they? It all centers on the pub. So I can see where the normalization of this takes place. So why do you think that is so even dangerous? I want to use the word dangerous.
I think that unfortunately, because alcohol is so socially acceptable in definitely in the UK, and it's been that way for decades, and I think that it's so available, it's just been so accepted, and I don't really think that that people understand the impact that it has. And it's actually worse, the impact that it has is worse than some drugs. And I think that lack of understanding is why some of these jokes and things like that happen. I mean, even on TV programs, people say, oh, it's never too early to have a drink. And those silly little comments that you wouldn't think are that important actually send out a message. And where that's happening across the board in lots of different places, and whether that's merchandise through things like pillows with Prosecco on, or gin, or whether it's handbags, or whether it's bangles filled with alcohol. Birthday cards, all of that.
For a child, so there's messages that the child is getting in the home, or the young person is getting in the home about this is normal. But I never thought also there's the wider, media and marketing impact. So thinking about a child growing up in this environment, how is it impacting them?
I mean, it's massively. I think it's one of the most complex environments to live in for a child. It's a very different experience for a child than it is for a parent of an alcoholic, or a partner to an alcoholic, or the wider family units, whether that's friends and colleagues and co-workers. So for a child, if you imagine that child's never probably been taught things like boundaries, they don't know what self-care is, they don't know about emotions, they don't know what those emotions are, and they certainly don't know how to express them. They've got absolutely no idea, so they tend to act out. So if you're working with children, then you're potentially going to see that behaviour, kids acting out, there's different roles that get played out in the home. And those children can play those out in other areas of their lives. They can experience anxiety, low self-esteem, this treading on eggshells that's really common in homes of alcoholism. which develops into this on edgeness and hypersensitivity, is something that they will be living with day in, day out. PTSD, it's a massive, massive problem. And just because a drinker may stop drinking doesn't stop the impact that it's had on the family and certainly on the children. And then that gets taken into their adult life and then has an impact on them as an adult, like myself. So that's how complicated it can be.
So for a child, you know, a child waking up every day in a household where either one or both of the parents or carers are using alcohol, you know, talk me through that a bit. Like what, you know, like so for example, you know, when my son was growing up, and I'm not the perfect parent by any means, but you know, I'd be there, we'd get breakfast, we'd maybe chat over breakfast, then there's all the hurrying to get to school and finding the bits of uniform and then walking him to school and maybe a little chat on the way and you know, a hug and a kiss as he goes into school, and then you know that would be relative, you know, with a bit of rushing sometimes. That's kind of relatively what many children go through. So what is the opposite of that if you're surrounded by alcohol?
So many children that are living with somebody that drinks too much, they could be getting up, especially if there's both parents that drink, they could be getting up, depending on, again, if they've got siblings or not, and they could be having to see to their own needs. So they having to wash themselves, having to get their breakfast, take something for lunch, having to help their siblings and helping them get dressed, or depending on their age. So this sense of over responsibility. So they're having to do that. Then having to make their own way to school, and that could be a long walk. They might not have clean clothes.
I was going to say they could be the smelly child.
Yeah, I was going to say that
children,
not smelling great. And they're, you know, usually teachers sort of can see that, you know, they can see that a child isn't being looked after. And then, you know, not after sort of, you know, getting to school, because maybe they're getting their own way to school. Then obviously when they get home, they don't know what they are basically going to be apprehensive. They are going to be thinking, what am I going to be confronted by when I open this door? And potentially they're not going to want to go home. They're going to make up some other reason.
Might loiter at school.
Might
back. Might even get into detention because at least they're an hour somewhere safe. Any number of things. It depends. Again, it's all the temperament of the child. There's so many factors involved. It's not one rule, obviously, but you know, there are these sorts of things do happen, and obviously then the child would go home, and then depending on, you know, they could be walking into carnage, bottles, cans all over the place. Maybe they go around cleaning it up, which is something a parent should be doing. There wouldn't be any, you know, parent reading to them bedtime stories, you know, bathing them. They'd have to see to that. Homework, presumably, or really hard to do homework.
No, I mean, in some,
not a hot meal.
Exactly. I mean, in some situations you'll have very rigid rules in a home of addiction, and other times you'll have completely the opposite and no rules, so the child can pretty much do what the hell they like. That's the polar opposites of each other, you know, how it can be depending on the home. So I think, again, it depends. If you have got one parent that's sober, then maybe they are a protective parent and they do try and keep some level of normality going in the home, but that's not always possible. And so if you've got two parents that are drinkers, then a lot of the responsibility will be on the children to manage themselves.
Okay.
Which obviously affects their mental health and, you know, how they feel about themselves and the fun or lack of that they have.
So I mean, you know, I mean, obviously I don't want to make you talk about anything it's all distressing what you've lived through, but so when you were a child, how, I mean, did you know that this was not okay? Because the thing with many of our childhoods is we've only got the one we're in at the time.
Exactly, yeah.
We don't know that this isn't normal. Maybe I should talk to somebody. How do I, you know, if you don't know there's a problem, you're not going to talk to anybody. No. And you just maybe think that this is how everyone's home is. So
yeah. I think I've been asked that question quite a lot, and I think that actually if I reflect on it in a bit more detail, I would say depending on my age. So early on, that's all I knew. I just got on with, you know, the dysfunction of what that home was like. I think as I got older and I started maybe going to other people's houses, and I could start to get an idea that actually their house wasn't the same as my house, but I didn't know what to do about it. And I knew that there were things happening in my home that weren't right. But when you're a child and you're this little person, you're looking up to this big person, and you trust, and well, you have to do what they say, whether you like it or not. And in an alcoholic home, you very often will start to lose all sense of reality, because you have to agree with the alcoholic, because if you don't, you will face their wrath. And that's just not worth it as a child. And so you start to compromise yourself to keep safe. And keeping safe is one of the main things that the child is going to be concerned about, is their safety.
So what, you know, if somebody is working with children or young people, what might they see in school? And again, I guess this is, you know, because it's such an individual experience.
It is.
So what did you need adults to notice? What did you need them to ask? Because presumably you lived like this for a long time, and nobody really noticed, or?
Well, no one would know about it, because one of the internal laws of the home is you don't talk.
No, wow.
So no one outside of our home really knew anything. And I've since spoken to school friends, and they had absolutely no idea what was going on, because you are there to keep this family secret. This is not something that we want people to know about. In terms of the behaviour that, you know, professionals would potentially notice or need to notice is, you know, again, the ranging characters. So there could be the quiet person, the very unassuming person that doesn't say anything, doesn't really make friends, doesn't, you know, very isolating, themselves to themselves, and prefers it that way. Then you've got the person that will act out and be very disruptive and just difficult, causing problems, that type of thing. You can also have the person that is a very high achiever. You know, if I'm perfect, if I'm a perfect child, then maybe my alcoholic father or mother won't drink or won't do this, that, and the other. So I'm trying to be perfect and achieve, so that I'm not going to get this repercussions of whatever is to follow when I get home.
It's unbelievably sad, Jo, isn't it? It's unbelievably. And what did you need an adult to say to you? I mean, not that the responsibility is never, ever, ever, ever on the child.
No, but they feel it is.
Yeah.
They absolutely feel it is. And that's one of the problems, is that they are blaming themselves, and they are thinking that if I'm really good, daddy, mummy will stop drinking, and that they have got some reason. My daddy is drinking because I'm this or I'm that. To be honest, I would have really liked it if someone had taken time and noticed me, if someone had come up to me and, you know, just started. There's this whole thing about, we don't want to talk about alcoholism because it's like bad and embarrassing and shameful and all the stigma that comes along with it. But actually, we need someone to say, look, you know, and be honest. And again, it depends on the age of the child, but let's not patronize them. You know, let's actually, depending on their age, be like, you know, your mum's drinking because she's really struggling with life at the moment. And that's what she's choosing to cope, because actually she feels pain. And so what's happening here is that she's drinking so she doesn't have to feel pain anymore. You know, can you understand that? Have you ever felt pain? You know, that type of, let's try and educate the child around why their parent might be drinking, and the fact that this child needs to be heard, and to know that it's okay about how they're feeling, and for them to have that space. You know, it takes time for children of alcoholics to trust people outside of their family.
Yeah.
And so for an external person to just be reassuring and say, I've noticed that you seem a bit quiet. I just want you to know I'm here, or, you know, it's that constant reassurance.
Regular check-ins, not
Very
just doing
much.
it once a term or once a whenever, but just offering, because it is about building. I mean, why would you trust anybody when the people that, you know, the most fundamental people in your life you can't trust,
exactly,
you know, on a conscious or subconscious level.
And
somebody just being kind to you, you know, it's going to take time to build bridges, and them having the courage to just keep reaching out in little ways. And
and I know that social workers struggle with that because they have a lot of workloads and a lot of pressure on them in terms of, you know, achieving and closing cases and that kind of thing. So I do understand that the pressure's on, but ultimately, you know, people don't work to numbers and stats, and ultimately if the goal is to help people, then rushing this is not going to get you there. You know, these children need time, and they need you to start identifying with them and to not be judgmental towards them, and certainly not be judgmental towards their parent, because that will totally break any kind of opportunity they'll have for building relationships.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you're saying, this is, to me, this is like, you know, another massive point that you're making, is obviously we would hope no one would be judgmental to children, although we know that that can happen. But you mustn't assume, and I've seen this happen a lot in my career, that they will think that mummy or daddy are bad, or if they're older, that mum or dad are a pain in the ass, or whatever it is. Don't jump to that assumption. You know, I certainly, in the work that I've done over the years, I've repeatedly been given the lesson that children want it to stop, but that they still in some way love whoever it is, or they want to love who it is. So if you go in with your preconceived, oh yes, no, it's not okay, is it? Oh, that must be bad, and oh no, daddy's you know, then boom, you've just blown the whole damn thing out of the water, I'm guessing.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that that's why one of the things I start my workshops with is, you know, what are your judgments and perceptions as a human being? Because before you're a social worker, or before you're a teacher, or before you're a GP, or before you're any of those things, you're a human being with judgments and perceptions. And that's fine. We're all the same. We can't pretend we're perfect and we are never going to have a judgment or perception about someone. But let's be honest with ourselves and identify that and have that awareness, and be able to say to ourselves, yeah, actually, I am feeling pretty judgy about this situation. I need to take a step back, because this situation I'm trying to help these people is not going to progress if I'm going in there with this sort of attitude. And unfortunately, the parents sometimes can be children of alcoholics as well.
Yes, of course.
And they're all dealing with their own traumas, because alcoholics are not afraid of death, they're afraid of life. They can't cope with life, and that is their main problem. What they need is support. What they don't need is tough love and judgments.
No, and I mean, the work of Gabor Mate, all of his work is around addictions of any sort having their roots in childhood trauma. And certainly in 25 years of my career working with families in all sorts of situations, I've only ever seen this. So so I wanted to ask you, Jo, what services do you provide? You've kind of mentioned some of them, but I'm going to put your website details in down below, so people can get in contact with you, because it's so essential that anyone who's working with children and young people, and you also do work around with adults as well, really understand this and know and feel confident to act. So what, I know you're a very inspirational speaker. People need to get you along to their conferences. Honestly, it's so important. But what else do you do?
So the workshops that I provide quite a lot to social workers and other professionals like that, GPs, is around the depths of alcoholism, and that covers information about the alcoholic and about drinking, and a lot more into what's making them drink, also the physical impacts that has, but also how this whole situation affects the family and the wider area and people in it, and how they can then best help the family and best support them. as also supporting businesses with staff that are misusing alcohol, because it costs businesses thousands of pounds in loss of productivity and absenteeism, because people are often out of work, hungover, or they come into work and they're not being productive because they've been drinking. And that's not just alcohol dependents that are doing that. It's people that are binge drinking and all of that kind of thing. And I also support people like myself that are individuals that have been affected, and they are adults and they are still struggling with anxiety and self-esteem. So one-to-one sessions. I've got a secret Facebook group called Change Your Mind. So families have got somewhere to go to feel supported, to know that they're not alone, because very often they'll have a lot of questions with not a lot of answers that make any sense. And so being able to chat and share with people that are just like them is a good sort of space really for them to get that support. And obviously speaking at conferences and you know, kind of events.
Okay, so, and I know you've been on television as well, you know, it's amazing the work that you're doing, Jo, and obviously the authenticity of having lived it, and then having this kind of internal external view of it is very powerful, and you know, have a wonderful balance around that, which I love as well. So I'll make sure I put all the ways people can contact you. And is your email on your website as well?
Yes, there's a link on there.
Great. So people can just click through and they can have a conversation with you and start exploring what they need. And I love that you're doing this for businesses as well. So thank you, Jo, for your time.
Thank you so much.
Insights. Honestly, it's been amazing. And,
that's all right. Thank you so much.
You know, talk again soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.
Struggling to stop the recording.